Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Ann Ryan Robertson, President of the Chartered Institute. It is my great pleasure and honor to provide the opening remarks for this International Women's Day event. I applaud the Chartered Institute for its continuing and unwavering commitment to the advancement of women in the field of dispute resolution, and I thank our media sponsors for their invaluable support of this event. International Women's Day is a global day celebrating the social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women. The day also marks a day to call to action for accelerating gender parity. During this pandemic, like most of us, I have spent many hours viewing movies on Netflix. Recently, I came across a title, Best Commercials of the 1960s. Of course, these were commercials that were viewed by an American audience. I fondly recall from my childhood Speedy, from the Alka-Seltzer commercial who would sing plop, plop, fizz, fizz, oh, what a relief it is, or the John Cameron Swayze intoning at the end of a Timex watch commercial, it takes a licking and keeps on ticking. But what I saw when I viewed this film was something quite different, and frankly, I was horrified. The film showcased commercials that depicted women as less intelligent, as dependent on men, and as sexual objects. One commercial in particular was shown a number of times. The husband complains to his wife that she cannot make a good cup of coffee. The wife is devastated and seeks advice from friendly, grandmotherly Mrs. Olson, who says, use Folgers coffee. It's mountain grown. That's the richest kind. I must admit, I found myself almost shouting at the television. If you don't like the coffee, make it yourself. But this collection of commercials did cause me to reflect on the progress that has been made regarding gender, at least in the world of commercials. But what about the field of ADR, and in particular, arbitration? In the ADR community in recent years, the issues of diversity and inclusion have come to the forefront due to the efforts of many. But the seeds were perhaps initially planted about 20 years ago with the establishment of Arbitral Women. I know that many of you are members of this organization. Its goals are advancing the interest of female practitioners and promoting women and diversity in international dispute resolution. From the initial efforts of a few, today, with the efforts of many, Arbitral Women is flourishing with members from around the globe. 2015 saw the creation of the Equal Representation and Arbitration Pledge. The Chartered Institute is one of hundreds, if not thousands, of signatories to the pledge. Recently, there has been the establishment of the innovative Arbitrator Intelligence. Its purpose is to provide objective data regarding arbitrators, which it collects, analyzes, and transforms into reports for use by those making arbitrator selection. The Chartered Institute itself has demonstrated its commitment to promoting diversity. It achieves its diversity objective by creating educational, membership, and training opportunities. I recently taught a Chartered Institute training course in Brazil, and approximately half of the candidates were women. In 2019, the Institute created its Women in ADR. Each year, the Chartered Institute interviews successful female ADR professionals with diverse jurisdictional backgrounds and at different stages in their careers. This year's interviewees are from France, Sri Lanka, Trinidad and Tobago, Nigeria, Scotland, Brazil, Kenya, the Bahamas, the United States, and Australia. These female practitioners' excellent stories can be found on the Chartered Institute website, and we hope that these stories will serve as an inspiration and empowerment for female practitioners around the globe. But what about the statistics? Are women receiving their appropriate share of arbitral appointments? The answer, sadly, is not yet. ICA has issued its cross-institutional task force on gender diversity and arbitration appointments and proceedings. According to the report, in the past few years, the percentage of female arbitrators has almost doubled. In 2015, the number on average was 12.2%. By 2019, the figure 21.3%. Of course, it is much easier to double a small number than a large one. We also know that the proportion of female institutional appointees exceeds the proportion of female co-arbitrator or party appointments. In the last few years, approximately 1/3 of all institutional appointees have been female. Some institutions have seen a marked increase. For example, in 2015, 28.2% of appointees by the LCIA were women. By 2019, that figure rose to a healthy 48%. In 2015, only 5.9% of exit appointees were women. In 2019, that figure was 25.8%. Unfortunately, the proportion of female party appointments has increased more slowly, from 8.5% in 2015 to 13.9% in 2019. Given the wealth of female arbitrator talent available to parties, this number suggests that the greatest opportunities for increasing gender diversity in arbitral tribunals lie with the parties and the counsel that represent them. So the question is, why has the proportion of female party appointments increased more slowly? The answers are many and varied. Perhaps foremost is the impact of unconscious bias. Unconscious bias has been described as one of the single most influential factors for the disparity between male and female representation on international tribunals. Second, women may not be included on lists or selected from those lists if gender diversity is low on the range of factors considered when counsel recommend arbitrators to their clients. Third is a potential aversion to first-timers. This aversion creates a barrier for new, more diverse candidates and reinforces a club of tried and tested existing arbitrators who almost invariably are male and pale. There is also the issue of limited access to information about qualified candidates. The 2018 Queen Mary survey found that the most selected source of information about arbitrators was word of mouth, 77%, followed by from internal colleagues, 68%. If you've never had an opportunity to sit as an arbitrator, your name is typically not part of these conversations. So, how do we address this continuing underrepresentation of women in ADR? As unconscious bias permeates the appointment process, attacking the issue of unconscious bias promises large dividends. To that end, both Arbitral Women and the Alliance for Equality and Dispute Resolution offer workshops designed to help dispute resolution stakeholders recognize unconscious bias and explore ways to address and overcome it. Arbitral institutions and other arbitration organizations can commit to ensuring that their panels and rosters reflect gender diversity. The list of members of the ICC Court's 2018-2021 term reflect full gender parity with 97 female arbitration practitioners. The ICDR has publicly stated its commitment to diversity and actively seeks applications from female arbitrators. Other institutions have similar commitments. And as a community, we must remain vigilant if gender parity is to be achieved. Since establishing the role of president of the Chartered Institute, there have been 4 female presidents. My elected successor is also female. While we are few, I am heartened by the fact that for a 5-year period, 3 of the presidents will be female. I am also heartened by the fact that the Board of Trustees was gender blind in its selection of the new Director General, Catherine Dixon, the first woman in the history of the Institute to hold the position. In my role as president, I stand on the shoulders of the 3 female presidents who came before me. As an arbitrator, I stand on the shoulders of all, female and male, who have promoted gender parity. Today, I urge each of us not only to stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, but also to join hands with those who stand with us, both female and male, as we continue to accelerate the quest for gender parity. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for those really inspiring words. We all, I know, feel very much that we stand on the shoulders of the giants that came before us. And thank you for really highlighting that, highlighting the progress that we have made, but also, as Anne says, the need to be vigilant as we move to the next chapter of this journey. And in one of her earliest speeches as First Lady, it was Michelle Obama who famously addressed a classroom of girls at a London primary school as future leaders of Great Britain and the world. And that opening line of itself made headlines. But to my mind, it shouldn't have done. It should not be newsworthy that girls are future leaders. And one day it won't be. One day, and I hope it's soon, we will stop talking about firsts and we will start focusing on the manys. As Anne said, there were few female chartered institute presidents, but 3 in the last 5 years is moving to manys. That's what we want to see. And as Anne says, in our world of ADR, I'm really glad to echo the point that women leaders as firsts is becoming less newsworthy. We have almost too many outstanding leaders in our field to mention. Obviously, I recognize and honor Anne today, as I do Catherine, our Director General, and outside the Chartered Institute. The wonderful Claudia Salomon has just been elected ICC President, as so many of you will know. Judith Gill recently took over the reins of the LCIA from Paula Hodges. And I could easily go on. There are many, many more. And lots of you in the fabulous audience today, and it is wonderful to see the energy on the chat already going on and the engagement of you all. Lots of you are leaders already. Many of you might well be on the cusp of leadership. You might be teetering on the point where you become partner or sit for the first time as an arbitrator. And some of you will have leadership roles further into your future. But regardless of where you are, where you sit on that leadership journey, one thing we can all be right now is an agent for change as we aspire to true equality in our profession. And I was honoured to give the keynote speech at our very first International Women's Day event, which was a wonderful occasion. And looking back to what I said then, in many ways, as Anne says, we have made great strides towards equality. And the numbers that Anne mentioned in her remarks don't lie. Our numbers are growing and there is strength, real strength in those numbers. Yet the pandemic, as we all know, has exacerbated many of the inequalities faced by women. And in my speech 2 years ago, I talked very much about the mental load, what I call the mental load, the family chores, the kids' appointments, the holidays, the childcare arrangements, caring responsibilities. And that mental load, almost invariably, it seems, falls on women. And the situation is worse now. Women are almost twice as likely to have lost their job as a result of the pandemic than men. Women are bearing the brunt of homeschooling, combined with caring and professional responsibilities. Women report that those all too familiar microaggressions, such as interrupting, mansplaining, and disrespectful comments, are magnified on Zoom. And I have to say that has been my experience in particular. The progress that we had been making with that Arbitral Women started years ago, which was towards eliminating and calling out the manel, that all-male panel at conferences, it seems to have been almost extinguished in the move to online conferences. And it is widely reported that the virtual classroom is, in fact, a far more hostile place for girls than it is for boys. So it is hard to be an agent of change when you're tired. And many women are tired of seeing the same faces, tired of hearing the same statistics, tired of preaching the same sermon, tired of fighting the same battles. Yet when we're tired, we can draw energy from others. And we can draw energy, frankly, from the chat that is going on as I'm speaking. And someone who exudes energy is our keynote speaker this evening. She has been a true and a standout catalyst for change in our profession. She is testament to the fact that we are stronger together. And whilst individually we may feel tired, together we can replenish our collective energy. And through her global network, Careers in Arbitration, Mandy has built an extraordinary foundation for change. And with her seemingly inexhaustible energy, she uses the network that she's single-handedly built up to help so many aspiring arbitration practitioners. And she makes an enormous difference to each and every one of them. And because she gives so freely of her time, she inspires others to do so as well. And as we all know, the more we give, the more we achieve. And Mandy has both given and achieved so much in her career. Tonight, she is speaking on Children of the Revolution, boldly going towards new gender diversity frontiers in international arbitration. Mandy has established new frontiers in the way we connect in the ADR world. She's established new frontiers in the way we communicate with each other and the way we advance in our profession. And although Mandy's talk this evening is about children of the revolution, about the next generation, Mandy herself has led a true revolutionary change in bringing arbitration finally into this century by connecting aspiring and existing arbitration practitioners across the world through social media. I often think that when we as female lawyers go about our daily lives, we really miss the strength in numbers that we see at events like this. And that, for me, is why International Women's Day is so important. 2 years ago, when I spoke at our first event, I looked around and I was so struck by the diversity that was in that room. There were people that looked like me, who didn't look like me. There was all sorts of people. And that's what we miss. We don't often get the opportunity to find that real diversity within members of our own sex. And Mandy's network of almost 30,000 practitioners that she's built up across the globe, that provides incredible strength in numbers and a real opportunity to find differences and diversity amongst female ADR practitioners. Now, as the title for Mandy's speech suggests, it will come as no surprise that she is a Star Trek fan. So I did think it was fitting to conclude my opening remarks with a quote from Surak, legendary Vulcan philosopher, scientist, and logician, considered by many to be the greatest of all who ever lived on Vulcan. Now, on meeting Dr. Spock and Captain Kirk, Surak reportedly said, "I am pleased to see that we have differences. May we together become greater than the sum of both of us." And through Mandy's leadership, quite frankly, the ADR community has certainly become greater together. So Mandy, you know I can't resist it. Be myself.
Wow. Thank you so much, Lucy. That's a fantastic introduction. I'm so grateful to the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators for the kind invitation to deliver the 2021 International Women's Day Lecture. I thank Anne and Lucy for their kind and thoughtful opening remarks. And I thank all our media supporters too for promoting and sharing this event. It's an honor and a privilege to address you all on this auspicious day. I hope you'll forgive me one small indulgence. This lecture, which perhaps rather appropriately discusses generations, is dedicated to my grandmother, Joan Morgan, whose burial took place earlier today. She was 95 and a strong woman who fought many battles of her own. I love and miss her very much. Nana, this one is for you. The creators of Star Trek dared to imagine a future in which gender and race were non-issues, a future in which anyone could take their place on the bridge and reach for the stars. That future is within our grasp, but in the words of the late, great Ruth Bader Ginsburg, real change, enduring change, happens one step at a time. The path to sustainable change, to real and enduring gender equality, is paved with many steps. Those who are familiar with the Star Trek television franchise know that September 8, 1966, the date when James Tiberius Kirk and his crew first burst onto the pop culture scene, represents the beginning, not the end of the story. The original series, as it became known in the years that followed, was succeeded by The Next Generation, which picked up the story 71 years after Captain Kirk had hung up his uniform. So, why have I chosen International Women's Day to dazzle you all with my Star Trek knowledge? Well, we build on the foundations laid by the generations that come before us. There are stones that have already been laid and stories that have already been told, but it falls to the generations that follow, the next generation and the ones to come, to be responsible for maintaining those foundations and building on them. They are the ones who must share and celebrate those stories. Join me today as I briefly retrace and reflect on some of the steps taken by the gender diversity pioneers and explore how the next generation of arbitration leaders can continue to boldly go where no woman has gone before. In recent years, our field has had the good fortune to be able to celebrate the appointment of an ever-increasing number of female leaders. These appointments were, however, often a long time coming. The City of London Chamber of Arbitration, as the LCIA was known as at its inception, was formally inaugurated on November 23rd, 1892. 123 years later, in May 2016, Judith Gill QC became its first female president. Its first female director general, Jackie van Herselt van Hoff, had taken charge just 2 years earlier, in July 2014. The ICC established the International Court of Arbitration in 1923. A mere 98 years later, Claudia Solomon became the first woman to be recommended as its president, a role she will assume from July 1st, 2021. The American Arbitration Association, founded in 1926, was, to quote Joa Johnson, chair of the AAA board at the relevant time, 86 years young when its first female president and CEO, Indira Johnson, was announced. Indira took the helm on January 1st, 2013. It was Margaret Rutherford who became the first female leader of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, 76 years after it was founded on March 1st, 1915. Appointed in 1992, Margaret held the office of chair before the role became known as president. Karen Goff was the first woman to be known by the title of president, taking office in 2001. The first Asian woman to serve as president, Teresa Cheng, was elected in 2008, with the first French-Lebanese female president, Naila Komarabid, taking charge in 2017. I had the pleasure and privilege of working with Naila when I became the first female chair of the Institute's Young Members Group Global Steering Committee that same year. Anne is the first American woman to serve as president of the Institute. For now, though, the future, as we've said already today, is female. Jane Gunn serves as deputy president, and when she becomes president in 2022, the Institute will have back-to-back female presidents for the first time in its history, another milestone achieved. And it's also of note that Catherine Dixon, who joined the Institute last year, is the first woman to serve as its Director General. ICA, the International Council for Commercial Arbitration, celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2011. Gabrielle Kaufman-Kohler became its first female president in 2018, a mere 57 years after ICA's first Congress was held in Paris in 1961. And she was succeeded recently by Lucy Reed in another welcome example of back-to-back female leadership. The first Brazilian arbitral institution, the CAM-CCBC, founded in 1979, appointed its first female president, Eleonora Coelho, 40 years later in 2019. Periods of time are getting shorter, I hope you can see. The Australian Centre for International Commercial Arbitration, founded in 1985, had to wait only 34 years for the appointment of its first female president. Brenda Horrigan began her tenure in April 2019. The World Trade Organization was founded in January 1995. 26 years later, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala became its first female and its first African Director General on March 1st, 2021, shattering 2 glass ceilings in one go. The Hong Kong International Arbitration, founded in 1985, has enjoyed more than a decade of female leadership. Sarah Grimmer succeeded Sean Bao as Secretary General in September 2016, Sean having assumed the role in 2010. And last, the Singapore International Arbitration Center, founded in 1991, is led by CEO Lim Sok Hui, who took the reins in June 2013. I could, of course, go on. There are many other women who've had the honor of being the first to hold a particular public role and to fly the flag for gender diversity progress. The purpose of this brief retrospective is to acknowledge that progress is being made. Hard-won and often rather slow progress, but progress nonetheless. Underpinning such progress lies a quiet revolution, a slow but steady changing of hearts and minds. I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to quote the Hamilton lyric, "Decisions are happening over dinner," when highlighting 2 significant steps on this journey that Anne has already touched on. More than a quarter of a century ago, on November 22nd, 1993, 60 women gathered for dinner at Restaurant Le Thomio in Paris. Arbitral Women was born. The movement founded by Louise Barrington and Mérès Philippe to connect and promote women in international dispute resolution faced resistance from those who were worried that they'd be branded as troublemakers for supporting or joining an organization that promoted women. I doubt that the proverbial old boys club has ever had such concerns. In the years that followed, Louise, Mérès, and many women have since picked up their swords and gone into battle for the cause of gender equality in our field. They have worked tirelessly. By doing so, they've helped to raise the profile of countless women. They've fostered a sense of community. Women may not be able to rely on the old boys club, but Arbitral Women offered us the hope of something better, something different. And it now has nearly 1,000 members scattered across the globe and continues to achieve firsts of its own, having held its inaugural India-focused event this afternoon. Gender equality was the beneficiary of a further call to arms on May 18, 2016, when the Equal Representation in Arbitration Pledge was launched in London. At yet another dinner, this time in London in April 2015, Sylvia Nowry gathered a group of women together to brainstorm about ways in which the chronic underrepresentation of women on arbitral tribunals could be addressed. The ultimate outcome was the pledge, which had 4,562 signatories as of Saturday when I last looked at the website. If you've not signed it yet, regardless of your gender, you can do something small but important today and add your name to the list of signatories. Such initiatives aim to recognize and promote women on an equal opportunity basis. Gender equality is never about promoting women to the exclusion of men. It's about recognizing and accepting that historically, women have faced barriers with which many men have not had to contend and deserve, may demand, to stand and be properly considered on their own merit. To quote CIAC CEO Lim Sok Hui, whose words would, I'm confident, be echoed by many in our field, "You don't want to be appointed because you're a woman. You want to be appointed because you're good." These are some of the battles that have been won so far. The glass ceilings that have been shattered, the mountains that we have climbed. Whether or not you regard the progress that's been made to date as a true revolution, the very fact that women are finally increasingly being appointed to senior leaderships in our field speaks volumes. And yet, in the fight for gender diversity, it's not enough to win battles. We must win the war. To paraphrase Lucy Greenwood, or to quote Lucy, "We're tired of firsts, bring on the many." Well, enough about the past for now. Let's talk a little bit about the present. My niece, Lottie May, is 5. She's thankfully shown absolutely no interest in pursuing a career in international arbitration to date. Her knowledge of my career consists of understanding that I live in London, in the words of her brother, with the dinosaurs, and a firm belief, fueled by a call from a train between New York and Washington, DC, that whenever I call on FaceTime, I'm always on a train. The legal arena that Lottie's generation will enter may be unrecognizable to those of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's generation. That being said, I think my niece has a pretty good handle on what the job involves already. International arbitration pre-pandemic involved a lot of travel, and some would say that it continues to be dominated, particularly on the arbitrator front, by those who, by her standards, would be classed as prehistoric. I take this moment to add, of course, that she charitably estimates my age as approximately 107. This is still our reality, the inevitability of travel, with its unavoidable impact on family life, which often disproportionately falls on the shoulders of women, and competing for appointments with the great and the good. And yet, my generation of arbitration practitioners has risen up the ranks during what is, if not a golden age for gender diversity in international arbitration, then at least hopefully a bronze age. Gender diversity is discussed openly by our community, by all genders, by parties and their counsel. On an equal opportunity basis, 50% of respondents to the 2016 BCLP arbitration survey on diversity on arbitral tribunals considered a gender balance on arbitral tribunals to be desirable. That survey's tagline was, "Are we getting there?" Well, 2 years later, nearly 60% of respondents to the 2018 Queen Mary International Arbitration Survey, and I quote, agreed that progress had been made in terms of gender diversity on arbitral tribunals over the past 5 years. So perhaps we can at least conclude that we're getting somewhere. Arbitral Women's been joined by innumerable initiatives designed to promote women in arbitration in different jurisdictions. Women Weigh in Arbitration LATAM, SWAN, the Swedish Women in Arbitration Network, and the HKIAC's Women in Arbitration Initiative, to name but a few. Arbitral institutions have celebrated the achievement of gender parity on their arbitration courts in many cases, and thanks to the work of pioneers such as Lucy Greenwood, increasingly publish their statistics on arbitral appointment by gender. We all sit binoculars in hand waiting for the next sighting of a statistical improvement in appointment rates for women. So, things are looking more positive. What then is there left for my generation, the children of the gender diversity revolution, if we assume, of course, that we have had a revolution, to do? Sadly, quite a lot. In addition to continuing to move the needle, particularly for women of color, it falls to the next generation to protect the hard-won gains of the generations before. We must not be defeated by hubris. I'm going to talk today about battles that we must fight on 4 fronts. So let's call them north, south, east, and west. Anne and Lucy have eloquently described many more such fronts, but I'm going to focus on just these 4 for now. After all, I'm only here for 45 minutes. First, our threat from the north, complacency. Gender diversity is not a public relations exercise. Those who pay lip service to promoting diversity in our field without practicing what they preach will find it difficult to persuade me that they're not hypocrites. By way of example, with so many women operating in our field, there is no aspect of international arbitration law, practice, or procedure on which at least one female panelist cannot be found to speak with expertise. There is no shortage of talent in our field. During the pandemic, Arbitral Women has regularly repeated a simple mantra. Diversity is equally important for virtual events. Some event organizers appear to have, whether accidentally or for other reasons, seized on virtual events as an opportunity to once again field panels composed entirely of male speakers, the dreaded manels. This is not good enough. Any organization or individual who signed the pledge commits to taking such steps as are reasonably available to them to ensure the conference panels include a fair representation of women. It's difficult to argue that such reasonable steps should not include spending 15 minutes reviewing one or more of the many lists of women in the field that are available on various well-known websites in order to identify potential speakers. In fact, let me make things simple. If you cannot identify a suitable female speaker for your forthcoming arbitration event, send me an email and I will suggest someone. Our job will be done when it's no longer praiseworthy for any less than 50% of speakers at any given event to be female. When featuring one woman on a panel is no longer seen as enough of a nod to diversity. It's our male allies whose voices are often heard most loudly in this regard. Those men who refuse to speak at events unless female speakers are included too, whether they raise the issue privately or publicly. Those men who lead arbitral institutions, head council teams, or organize conferences, and deliberately and purposefully use their platforms to shine a spotlight on talented women. We appreciate you and we need you, gentlemen. Although business considerations inevitably lie at the heart of offering and accepting speaking engagements, if more of our male arbitration leaders, those men who will always receive invitations because they're recognized as institutions in our field, privately begin to ask conference organizers to confirm that gender diversity has been taken into account when selecting speakers before they agree to speak, we can move the needle. I call on them to do so for their female colleagues, for their wives, sisters, daughters, and granddaughters, but most importantly, to do so because it's the right thing to do. We cannot let any of our hard-won progress be washed away on a tide of complacency, even during a pandemic. Today, I choose to challenge you all to resist complacency and to politely question those who do not. Second, our Southern front. We must diversify our diversity. This is where affinity bias comes into play. Affinity bias is the unfortunate, often unconscious tendency to gravitate towards those who are like us, whether in appearance, background, beliefs, or otherwise. We know what we like and we like what we know. When we recruit, when we identify the names of arbitrators to include on lists of potential candidates, when we select potential panelists for our events, even when we allocate work, affinity bias may come into play. If the outcome of the gender diversity revolution is a generation of leading pale, stale, and female arbitrators, we may try to blame lack of access, lack of opportunities, or affinity bias, but we will only have ourselves to blame. There are talented women out there from across the globe. We need to find them. So we must better embrace and celebrate intersectionality. This term was first coined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw more than 30 years ago. In her words, it describes a lens, a prism, for seeing the way in which various forms of inequality often operate together and exacerbate each other. Professor Crenshaw focused in particular on sexism and racism faced by African-American women in the United States and how inequalities that such women face are compounded. Simply put, they're fighting multiple simultaneous battles against inequality. We're all so much more than our gender identity. We're Asian, Black, Indigenous, Hispanic, white. We're young and not so young. We're lawyers and we are members of other professions. To be legitimate, our initiatives, particularly those focusing on gender diversity, must include the voices of women from Africa, Asia, Australasia, Europe, and the Americas. We need to be inclusive. If women start practicing arbitration in Antarctica, we need to hear from them too. I'm female. I'm also white, fairly ghost-like, in fact. On a good day, when I've had a decent amount of sleep, I look quite young. I'm 5'1", which is just under 155 centimeters, which puts me below average height in much, if not all, the Western world. You may laugh at me for saying this, but various studies have shown a correlation between height and earning potential for both men and women. Newsflash, short people do not make more money. And those are just some of the things that you see when you look at me, but that is not all I am. However, while I may face inequalities due to my age or gender, it's an inescapable reality that my race and the fact that I live in the West in a major arbitral seat afford me significant privileges. For many of my female colleagues around the world, the impact of gender inequalities may be particularly compounded by not just the injustices that often come with gender, such as being statistically likely to be paid less than men over their working lives, or leaving the field due to issues associated with the so-called leaky pipeline, but issues associated with their race, geographical location, sexual orientation, religion, cultural background, professional background, and socioeconomic background. It would be remiss of me not to acknowledge that the vast majority of women that I have mentioned so far today are white women from the Western world. In particular, there is a clear and present need to do more to ensure that opportunities for Black female leaders are provided in our field. To name but two trailblazing Black women on the international stage, Gabrielle Mcdonald was the first African-American woman to be appointed as a judge at the Iran United States Claims Tribunal, and Deborah Enix Ross, the first African-American woman to be appointed as counsel at WIPO. There are many more trailblazing Black female leaders, not just in the United States, of course, but in Africa, in the Caribbean, and across the globe. We must do more to ensure that their time comes. I did not have the opportunity to mention enough of their names in the first part of this lecture. Faced with the wide spectrum of unique intersectional characteristics that every member of the international arbitration community possesses, we need to get a better handle on our own affinity bias. When it comes to identifying on an equal opportunity basis the best person for the job, we need to hold ourselves to account and make sure that we're putting forward not just those women who look or think like we do, but those who are best suited to the task at hand. We must choose to challenge our own biases and rise above them. Parties in council are understandably risk averse and consequentially gravitate towards appointing known entities. One of the problems, of course, is a lack of information about arbitrators, particularly arbitrators who are female. Many female arbitrators may be well known and well established in their home jurisdictions, but they cannot make their mark on the global stage if no one is aware how brightly they shine. We all have an ongoing part to play in recognizing and promoting female talent wherever it is found. If we are to help the next generation of arbitrators to develop their reputations, we have a moral imperative to tackle those informational asymmetries. That imperative applies regardless of gender, age, race, and so on. After all, one of the much lauded benefits of arbitration is the ability of the parties to choose an arbitrator. The best person for the job may well be a lawyer, but there will always be times when an architect, a quantity surveyor, or someone else entirely may be the right choice. We need to recognize talented women, not only from all backgrounds, but from all disciplines. We change the status quo only by sharing information about talented women, by connecting, by talking to each other. Initiatives like Arbitrator Intelligence provide us with the means to do exactly that. By sharing, we can influence the narrative about women who are available to act as arbitrators and who are already doing so. After all, we all want to be appointed on merit, not by virtue of quotas or affirmative action. The women that I've mentioned today, and so many like them, are trailblazers. We follow in their footsteps and we recognize their achievements. We can do so because we know about them. It's no coincidence that many of the same women regularly receive appointments and speaking engagements. By celebrating and sharing information about talented women in our field who are diverse by virtue of factors other than their gender, we do two things. We help to tackle the lack of gender diversity on tribunals by raising awareness of talented arbitrators wherever they are based. And we promote role models for the next generation of female practitioners who will see women from the same race, religion, culture, and jurisdiction as them succeeding. So today I choose to challenge you all to diversify your idea of diversity and to remember that women are so much more than their gender. On now to our Eastern Front. We must have the courage to make our field more accessible to women from different backgrounds. As human beings, we have a natural tendency to embrace information that is consistent with and confirmatory of our existing beliefs and to reject information that contradicts them. This confirmation bias lies at the heart of a flawed belief that there is nothing wrong with doing things in the way that they've always been done. Why should the next generation of women not have to do the things that we had to do in order to get ahead? Why shouldn't they have to face the same struggles? Well, for a start, things have changed quite significantly since then. And when it comes to the cost associated with entering our field, not for the better. The time-honored path into the field of international arbitration tends to involve at least some of the following steps. Aspiring arbitration lawyers are often first exposed to international arbitration advocacy via mooting competitions, whether domestic or international. The benefits associated with mooting are enormous, but for those based in less developed jurisdictions, even the registration fee may be prohibitively high. The costs associated with travel to and accommodation at international venues may render the competition and the benefits accompanying it unaffordable. Teams may have no coach, limited or no access to other schools with which to practice, at least in the pre-Zoom era. Do we all remember that? And limited or no opportunities to participate in the wide range of pre-moots that take place around the world. Some female students may not even be permitted to travel abroad with their teammates due to their gender. An LLM in international arbitration, international dispute resolution, or a related discipline is increasingly seen as the preferred pathway into the field. Recruiters need a way of separating candidates. If candidates do or don't have an LLM, it's one basis on which to do so. The prevailing expectation is that such qualification will be obtained from a university, ideally in the West, likely a market-leading institution with a market-leading price tag. It is, of course, necessary to be able to pay the tuition fees or obtain a scholarship, ideally covering both fees and, of course, living expenses. Don't forget about those. Full-time LLM programs make working difficult. So students need to be able to support themselves for the duration of their studies, whether by using their own money, securing financial support from family, friends, a third party, their employer, or by borrowing. The cost may leave women unable to afford to pursue such studies until later in their careers, by which time they're much more likely to have family responsibilities and to be unable to leave their families and their children to pursue extended periods of study. Their window of opportunity is limited. This obstacle to professional growth was highlighted, for example, in the African Association of Universities Gender Mainstreaming Toolkit. The availability of part-time online LLM programs makes qualifications more accessible for women abroad and women who need to balance study with existing professional and family commitments. Tuition is not exactly cheaper, though. Payment is simply spread across a longer period of time. If a course is too expensive for you to afford, it's likely to still be too expensive even if you spread it out over 2 years instead of 1. LLM certificate in hand, aspiring arbitration counsel then embark upon applying for and completing internships, whether at a law firm, an arbitral institution, an NGO, or elsewhere, in order to gain the practical experience required to hopefully secure a full-time job as an arbitration associate with a decent salary. Many internships are unpaid. Many more are badly paid. Many of you will well recall completing such internships in the early stages of your careers. You may have had fantastic experiences. Such internships, of course, have a value. But with no salary, interns must be able to self-fund their living expenses. For those from jurisdictions where even the average salary for a qualified lawyer may be less than $1,000 per month, an internship, particularly in the US or Europe, becomes a potentially insurmountable financial burden. Flights, accommodation, insurance, visa fees, commuting costs, because you have to get to the internship, and food all require money. With unpaid internships in particular, it is the intern that ultimately pays. As a field that prides itself on being international, there is an expectation that aspiring women in arbitration who do not come from wealthy backgrounds, and remember, wealth is jurisdictionally relative, will get into debt to secure the right credentials. And remember, of course, there's no guarantee that any aspiring arbitration practitioner will secure an elusive arbitration role when their studies conclude. The pot of gold at the end of the rainbow may instead be a large debt, a very jazzy certificate, and a head full of unused knowledge. I'm the first person in my family to practice law, and I was the first to attend university. I attended a non-fee paying state school and sixth form college, and I was lucky enough to be able to study law at A-level before I progressed to my undergraduate studies. I was also lucky enough to go to university before the latest round of UK tuition fee increases. I still had to borrow money from the government to cover my tuition fees and living expenses. I was then lucky again because I managed to find a training contract to become a lawyer and ultimately to be able to pay off all of those pesky loans. I have no hesitation in saying that I could not have afforded to undertake an unpaid internship, nor could I have afforded to live in London or abroad to undertake a poorly paid internship. I could not have afforded to pursue an LLM either, and thankfully I was not expected to have one. If such opportunities were out of my reach as a British person from a middle-class background, what chance do women from less developed and emerging jurisdictions have? I hasten to add that aspiring UK-based arbitration lawyers have it much harder now too, facing far higher tuition fees and, dare I say, ever higher expectations. Research has consistently demonstrated that race, ethnicity, and gender are closely intertwined with socioeconomic factors. Unpaid and underpaid internships entrench inequalities in our field. To paraphrase George Orwell's Animal Farm, all aspiring arbitration lawyers are equal, but some aspiring arbitration lawyers are more equal than others. Our field is competitive, and there are understandably high barriers to entry. However, a roadmap for new entrants that is heavily and increasingly weighted in favor of those who come from wealthy backgrounds, or at the very least from developed jurisdictions, does not allow women or men to compete on a level playing field. Socioeconomic factors underpin every aspect of diversity, and they compound historical inequalities. We have to keep talking about them. Why is this relevant to women in particular, you might ask? Well, the burden of unpaid labor already often falls disproportionately on women in any event, with many taking on the lion's share of caring and housekeeping responsibilities. Nothing like coming home from your day of not being paid to have to do more work for which you're not paid. However much we all love our families, of course. Women are often already marginalized due to other factors that we've discussed today, including their race, religion, or culture. Research by the National Association of Colleges and Employers indicated that women were overrepresented in populations of unpaid interns and underrepresented among paid interns. And that's data coming from the US. Data about arbitration interns is sadly unavailable, but would definitely be welcome. So, recognizing that it does not fall to arbitration lawyers to right all of the wrongs of the world, what can we do to end this arbitration animal farm? Well, we can start paying our interns sensibly, but recognizing that things are not always that simple. We can start by remembering that it's possible to work remotely. Some jurisdictions will not grant visas to single women from certain countries. If a woman cannot take up her internship place in person because she's unable to obtain a visa due to her gender, age, or marital status, accommodate her virtually. We know we can do that. We've had a lot of practice during the last year. If a woman from a less developed jurisdiction is forced to turn down an internship offer because she cannot afford to travel to the place where the firm or organization is based, or her family would be unable to join her, explore ways in which she can participate remotely. Likewise, moot organizers can take steps to ensure that we do not forget the lessons of the pandemic and ensure that money is not a barrier to education by further exploring means of offering fee waivers if significant financial hardship can be demonstrated. Some do this already. Moot organizers can continue to enable teams to participate remotely if they cannot travel, even after travel becomes possible once again. Arbitral Women, for example, offers financial support each year to women who may otherwise be unable to participate in the Viz Moot. More organizations can do this. There are many ways to obtain knowledge about the theory of arbitration. For those firms and institutions that make having an LLM a prerequisite to applying for an internship, consider other ways in which applicants could demonstrate equivalent knowledge, whether via completion of a more affordable training course, a domestic course, or by providing a portfolio of publications or research contributions, or evidence of legal experience involving transferable skills that should be given greater weight. For institutions that offer unpaid internships, even nonprofits can explore ways to offer scholarships, perhaps with the support of the wider arbitration community, can earmark funds or otherwise provide financial aid to enable women from emerging jurisdictions or those who can demonstrate financial hardship to have recourse to some level of financial assistance. No applicant male or female, who's offered a place on an internship, who has demonstrated that they are good enough, should be prevented from accepting that opportunity due to socioeconomic factors. Most importantly, though, we need to give our confirmation bias radars a tune-up and ask ourselves, is this really acceptable? Just because this is the way that things have been done should not mean that we cannot change things. Our field explores big issues all the time. The legitimacy of the international legal system, what rights should be afforded to foreign investors, whether human rights have been breached. We debate such issues endlessly in articles, at conferences, and amongst colleagues. I choose to challenge you all today to take a step back and apply the same level of scrutiny to the pathways into our profession. That brings me at last to our Western Front. As women, we must better support each other, and we must reject gender stereotypes. There is so much that I could say on this topic, but I will limit myself to a few short observations. We must recognize and own our privileges and use our platforms to lift other women in our field up, rather than competing with them or ignoring or minimizing their struggles. Part and parcel of providing support is championing gender-related causes that we may not feel are ours to champion, as our many male colleagues choose to do when they support gender equality and promote women in our field. Our voices often have the greatest power when we use them to shine a spotlight on the challenges that our female colleagues around the world are facing, not just the challenges that women face in our own backyards. My female mentees in India, Africa, and beyond face challenges to enter this field that make the challenges that I faced and that people in the UK face practically pale into insignificance. Continuing, research is clear. Women make excellent leaders, and yet, when women use their leadership skills, we find that microaggressions kick in. They're often dismissively characterized as bossy, frequently, I hasten to add, by other women. The ability to take charge is valued in men. Why not in women? We need to reject the focus on likability that so often keeps women from progressing in competitive fields, and ours is nothing if not competitive. By encouraging our female colleagues, mentees, and students to explore opportunities, even if they may not feel ready for them, we help to shape their understanding of what they can achieve. Research has shown time and time again that men will apply for jobs even if they do not match the job description. It's time for women to seize such opportunities and to stop feeling guilty for putting themselves forward. The council of today are the arbitrators of tomorrow. We need to nurture aspiring female counsel from the beginning of their careers, and there are a number of practical steps that we can take. Those working in law firms who are responsible for allocating work need to make sure that such allocation is fair and uninfluenced by unconscious biases. We also need to take a good hard look at our promotion processes to make sure that women are not unfairly prejudiced due to judgments about their value being based purely on factors such as face time, billable hours, and so on. These may be more challenging for women with caring responsibilities in particular to fulfill. Regardless of our age or level of experience, we all, men and women alike, need to serve as mentors and sponsors for the next generation, giving them strong role models and champions from all backgrounds who will promote them, challenge them, and give them room to grow and develop into the counsel and arbitrators of tomorrow. I choose to challenge you all today to better support each other, to celebrate each other's achievements, and to let go of preconceived notions about what a woman can do and should be. That, ladies and gentlemen, is where some of our key challenges still lie. By fully embracing the diversity of our gender, by fostering and supporting talent, by exploring new pathways into our field, and by calling out those who seek to undermine our hard-won progress, we can continue to move forward. When I was preparing this lecture, my friend David Phillips QC told me a story about his mother, who was a criminal barrister in practice in South Wales. In the late 1940s, she was instructed to represent a female client. At the time, this development was sufficiently unusual that it was reported in the local newspaper under the grand headline, "Woman represents woman in court." Those days are thankfully behind us. But in the field of international arbitration, it's still something of a novelty to appear before a tribunal composed entirely of arbitrators who happen to be women, or for both counsel teams to be led by or even composed solely of women. For as long as women appear before women is still headline worthy, there will always be work left for us to do. Gender equality is our final frontier. Although we may not achieve it within my lifetime, I'm confident that, in the words of the Borg, a classic Star Trek Next Generation nemesis, resistance is futile. We will get there in the end, and we all, men and women alike, have a role to play if we are to find ourselves on that bridge, reaching the stars. I missed a trick by failing to ask Sir Patrick Stewart to provide the narration, but I've taken this opportunity to rewrite the classic Star Trek introduction. Here we go. Equality, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the children of the revolution. Their lifelong mission to shatter all glass ceilings, to seek out new triumphs and new opportunities, to boldly go where no woman has gone before. I hope that you will all, regardless of gender, join me on that trip, and that together we will always, to quote Ruth Bader Ginsburg, fight for the things that we care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join us. Thank you so much for listening.
Oh, Mandy, thank you. What an inspiring 45 minutes. I was meant to be organising questions and chat and monitoring things, and all I could do was listen. Thank you. Thank you for making such a nuanced and thoughtful and sophisticated analysis of a problem that is often dismissed as a simple problem, which is we don't have enough women in our field. But it's not a simple problem. It's a complicated, difficult problem. And you today have given us the tools to address that problem. And I speak for everyone who has had the pleasure of hearing you speak this evening to say thank you for doing that. Now, I will do what I'm told, and I will put some questions to you, Mandy. You don't escape that lightly. But really, for me, I am inspired by your words tonight, particularly inspired by you shining a light on something that you know has concerned me for years, which is this issue of socio-economic diversity. And I am so glad to hear it ventilated in such a nuanced and brilliant manner tonight. So thank you particularly for that. So let's do a couple of questions, and people on the call, please do chime in with questions in the Q&A box. But let me start with one. Your Northern Front kind of sets the scene for everything else, and that's this idea of complacency. I have been worried about complacency, and in that I sort of echo Lucy Reed from a conference back in DC, must be about 3 or 4 years ago now, where she talked about getting to a stage where you had enough women was good enough, as it were, and that we would all stop working. What in particular can we do to challenge the notion of complacency? And again, this goes to the idea of moving away from firsts and into manys, as we say.
Well, there are a great many things that we can do to use more manys. Many things that we can do. One of the things that's worried me is this rumbling in the international arbitration community that we're getting a bit tired of panels that talk about gender diversity. It's all getting a bit, you know, we've done it before. We don't want to keep talking about it. We need to keep talking about it, but we need to find new ways of talking about it. There's no point repeating the same messages over and over again. We need to keep questioning ourselves. We need to keep drilling down and trying to do more. And that means that we need to be a little bit tougher on ourselves. When it comes to putting together speaker lists for panels, for example, we don't need to pat ourselves on the back because we put one woman on a panel. My minimum criteria to share any arbitration event on careers in arbitration is that there must be an average of one woman per panel. That's pretty embarrassing criteria, frankly, very much, you know, but that was sort of my absolute bare minimum acceptable level of diversity. That cannot be enough for all time. We cannot be in a position where we start saying, well, 24% of the women that we've appointed were female, so we should all pat ourselves on the back and celebrate, and maybe in 3 years' time it'll go up by another 2%. But most of them will be white women from the West, but there'll be a couple of other high-profile women from Latin America or Africa or Asia. We need to keep challenging those biases. We need to keep saying to ourselves, is this person the right person for the job? Have I really gone out, spoken to my colleagues, spoken to my contacts, and worked out if there are other candidates in the field that should be given an opportunity? It's all about communication. It's all about connection. I appreciate I might not have answered that question very well in terms of a nice bullet point list. I might try and do one of those for a post on LinkedIn at some point in the future, because everybody probably knows how much I like doing those.
No, it's your question, your answer was absolutely spot on, Mandy, because I mean, this is, I think this does come down to challenging ourselves and not just sitting back and going, okay, I've ticked a box, I've added one woman to a list, I'm on the good guy's side, if I can put it like that. There was a question in the Q&A that alluded, and I'm going to ask you this because this is a provocative subject. It alluded to quotas, and it alluded to quotas in relation to participating as junior arbitrators and things like that. But I want to sort of broaden it generally to understand where you stand on quotas. I over the years have gone backwards and forwards on quotas, and increasingly I feel that if we're going to have real significant change within a reasonable time period, it may be somewhere we need to go. What are your thoughts?
I agree with you completely, Lucy, that this is something that we all go back and forth on. It's very difficult to sort of reconcile when you, with your sort of personal self-worth, that you've been given an appointment because you're female, or because you come from a particular geographical location, or a particular religion, or a particular ethnicity. We don't, or at least I don't want to be a statistic. I don't want to be there because I happen to be female. We've all sat on panels where we felt, I am the token female. I am here purely to ask a couple of nice questions to make the boys look good. And that's it. I am the token woman on the panel. And that is a little bit like a quota, because we're saying, oh, well, as long as we've got one woman, we're diverse, that's okay. The problem when it comes to having quotas for panel nominations, of course, is that arbitration is about autonomy. It's up to the parties to choose who they want to nominate as arbitrator. Obviously, institutions are in a slightly different position, but institutions still owe a duty to their users. They have to make sure that the best person is the person that's being put forward. If it's an institutional nomination, the person's got to be qualified, they've got to be competent. You don't want the parties sitting back and going, gee, this person's a woman, so they're probably a sort of, they're an affirmative action candidate. How do we know if they've been chosen because they're really the best? I don't want to be one of those people. I don't want somebody looking at me when I've been appointed as an arbitrator and thinking, it's because she's a girl.
And you articulate very well, though, the sort of residual concerns about quotas on that. And I'm going to segue briefly, we only have time for a very last question, but segue briefly into a question from Caroline Croft, which slightly relates to what you were just saying about gender stereotypes. And I loved your statement in your speech about how we are so much more than gender identity. And this is something that I have felt passionately about for years. And Caroline's question says, she hears you when we say we need to combat stereotypes, especially gender stereotypes. Now, this is where the nub of the question, does it hurt the cause of diversity to organize initiatives aimed at or marketed for a female audience? And particularly, I get very concerned about this when you have sort of leadership courses for women, because there's sort of implication in that women need training to be leaders, which, as you rightly said in your speech, is, you know, far from the case. So let's just close, if we may, with your thoughts on that question.
There are some issues that disproportionately impact on women. It's inescapable that caring responsibilities, for example, fall generally, often, historically, more heavily on women. There are other issues that women are more likely to have to deal with in the workplace. Sexual discrimination, for example. So there are always going to be topics where having a safe space, having a women-only forum, having an initiative that's aimed purely at women is going to be of value. When it comes to finding role models, we all want to meet people that we can see ourselves becoming. Obviously not literally, of course, this isn't Face Off, but people that we can see ourselves becoming in the years to come. We want people to look up to. I say this in full admission that many of my role models, probably most of them, are men. They tend to be middle-aged white men as well, so, you know, screamingly diverse there. But there is nothing like being able to look up to someone who is female, who comes from a similar background to you, who has faced many of the same struggles that you face and can actually talk about it with authority, not just paying lip service to the fact that, oh, gee, it must be very difficult being a woman in international arbitration, you poor thing. Not that I'm saying people say that, but occasionally we may all have had that conversation once in a lifetime. So yes, I think women-only initiatives do have value. In the same way as there are areas in which men-only initiatives have value, but in general, we need to be focusing on inclusivity, particularly when it comes to things like leadership.
Absolutely, and we will be hearing from some wonderful role models after the break with our next panel discussions. So with that, thank you, Mandy. That was wonderful. And I know how much everyone has appreciated your words tonight. So thank you very much. And we, I think, are going to take a short break and come back with our panel discussion. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much to our previous speakers, Anne and Lucy and Mandy, for their inspirational and timely reminder to us all that we need to, as the theme of International Women's Day would have it, we need to choose to challenge now more than ever. And I'm delighted that we have now a panel discussion with 3 leading ADR specialists who are all primed to rise to that challenge. So my name's Kim Franklin. I'm an international arbitrator, and I'm here flying the flag for the London branch of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. I'm not wearing a unicorn badge. I'm bucking the trend there. I'm stepping in the footsteps of Lady Hale instead. So let me briefly welcome our panel, starting with Rosemary. Rosemary Jackson. She's well known to you all, I'm sure, as a domestic and international mediator at Keating Chambers. Rosemary is described as an exceptional mediator and recognized as a global elite thought leader in mediation. She was also, I believe, from my own reliable evidence, the first woman at the construction bar. And then Dorothy Ufot is a senior advocate in Nigeria and the founding partner of her own law firm, specializing in international arbitrations. She's recognized as a leading expert and accolades abound, but I don't have to say anything more than that she was awarded African Arbitrator of the Year in 2020, which was otherwise a bit of a rubbish year. So congratulations to Dorothy on that. And then Sue Lindsey. Sue qualified as a chartered architect before coming to the bar. She now specialises in dispute resolution, particularly UK construction adjudication at Crown Office Chambers, but she's retained links with her previous profession and the RIBA, where she's chaired their disputes resolution committee. So just to remind you, if you want to ask questions, can you do it through the Q&A box, please? But for now, I'm going to do the questions. My panel are going to do the answers. And I want to start at the beginning, if I can. When you were young, panel, did you want to be an ADR professional when you grew up? Can I start with Dorothy, please?
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, the CIArb, for having me. I'm very pleased to be here today, International Women's Day. When I was growing up, I wanted to be a lawyer more than anything else. And indeed, I became a lawyer. And in the course of my lawyering, I came in contact with ADR, that is Enforcement of Arbitral Award. So I developed an interest in wanting to know what arbitration is all about. From that first encounter with trying to enforce an arbitral award at the High Court, I developed an interest and then went further to sit for the fellowship exam of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. And that examination took place in Spain, Barcelona, Spain. After qualifying as a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, I then went on to undertake pupillage with Tony Canham, former president of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, and qualified as a chartered arbitrator. And I would say my career in ADR, particularly arbitration, just began to fly. So today I've reached the pinnacle of my two careers as a lawyer. I'm a senior advocate of Nigeria, which is the equivalent of the English Queen's Counsel. I'm also a chartered arbitrator. So I think both careers have been good with me.
Well, that's a very impressive story, not least because you've ended up more or less where you started out wanting to be, and that is quite something. Was it like that for you, Rosemary?
Not entirely. I'm not going to pretend that when I was young I had the faintest idea what an ADR professional might be. I'm sure I had never heard of a mediator, and I don't think I ever heard about mediators until the 1990s, when the sort of people we heard about were the white men who flew across the world resolving wars. I certainly didn't know there were commercial mediators. I did know what barristers were, mostly because I used to come home from school and watch a soap opera called Crown Court. And if you're old enough to remember that, I know how gripping that was. Instead of doing my homework, I was watching that. We didn't have any lawyers in the family. We didn't know any lawyers. I had no desire to be a lawyer. It never occurred to me that I could be a lawyer. It hadn't been a thought I'd had. And so I was very surprised when my father came home from a parents' evening when I was about 11, I think, and told me that he'd informed my maths teacher that I was going to be a judge. It was the most humiliating and embarrassing thing that could have happened, because I didn't want to be a lawyer, let alone a judge. He lived long enough to see me become a lawyer, but sadly not long enough to see me become a judge. But that wasn't my ambition. I'm sorry, I know I don't want to take too long. I would have liked to have been a doctor, but physics, chemistry, and biology were too difficult. I would have liked to have been a nurse, but I'm not very good at taking instructions, and it was thought that wouldn't be a great idea. I would have loved, and I still hanker after being an undertaker, which I know seems odd, but I think it's quite like being a mediator. It's the caring side of life when people are in a difficult place, of doing something to help them. So maybe one day.
Yes, moving them on to a better place. And well, maybe Crown Court inspired your father as to your choice of a career. Now, Sue, I seem to remember that your daughter once announced that she knew what it was that you did at work, and that she'd been told by her brother that she knew confidently that you were a barrier. Was that, was that something you wanted to be when you grew up?
Oh.
We can't hear you, Sue. Maybe,
got it.
Yeah, well done.
Yeah, my technology has got so much better this last few months. No, do you know, yes, a barrier. Well, that says it all, really. Do you know, when I was young, and I mean really young, like kind of 7 or 8, and I wanted to be one of those men who put up big advertisements on billboards. You know, the ones who go up with ladders, or they did, and they had rolls and rolls of paper and a bucket of glue, and they worked by themselves, and they put up these huge bits of paper, and they had to get them in the right place and join them up exactly. It's like a giant jigsaw puzzle. And I thought this was fabulous. But I didn't do that. I became an architect, so lots of big bits of paper, I suppose. And but then via a few years as an architect, several years really, and to the bar. And what I do now, you've made me reflect, actually. Still lots of bits of paper, still puzzling things out and fitting things together and sort of lining things up and finding the answers, and still quite a lot sort of on my own. It's quite a lonely job doing this sometimes, because you're there deciding things by yourself. So not dissimilar from my first thought to 8. Not often up a ladder though these days, I have to say.
Well, I think the big picture, creating the big picture and aligning everything so that it can be admired by our public or those who use our services, I think is a very good analogy, perhaps, with what joins us together. But can I move on to something that Mandy mentioned in her very comprehensive and inspiring talk, which is that as your careers got going, did you find that you had to choose between success and likability? You know, the received wisdom is that ambitious men, they're driven and enterprising, whereas ambitious women are bossy and pushy, and no one likes to be thought of being bossy and pushy. So they've either got to get on with this adverse label or rein in their ambition. Rosemary, is that something that you've had experience of?
Well, this whole question is one that really quite upsets me, because you know, all the studies seem to show that successful women are not seen as very likable, and there seems to be an either-or decision that has to be made. And I hate the idea of that, and I suspect that I'm like everybody else, and unconsciously I probably do some of that myself, some of that stereotyping, and have some of those biases. But you know, I can't stop the general perception in the world as to what women are like and how they perform. All I can control is how I interact with the world. So for me, it's very important that in my life, I try to be my genuine self. And I've tried very hard not to mold myself to fit other people's ideas of what a woman should be or do. And also not to try and act in a way that is overtly challenging to other people's perceptions, but simply to role model how you can be a woman and just do your job, despite being a woman. And because of being a woman, they don't really matter. It's being a woman and doing this job, being guilty of doing a job well whilst being a woman. And I think that's, you know, if we can do that, that's a really good thing. And Kim, you mentioned my start at the bar. 1983, I arrived at what's now Keating Chambers, to the construction bar. I was the only woman. All the barristers were men. Most of the solicitors were men. There were a few women. The judges were all men. The clients were all men. All I met were men. And I think I was something of an oddity to them. I think they were quite fascinated by me and how I would react. There were a number of clients who, when first meeting me, would do this to me. Luckily, only once, because they'd be put right by seeing that I was competent, and then they wouldn't do it again. But it was a time when a lot of the women barristers there looked like token women. These sets of chambers have got a woman, we don't need another one. And a lot of the women were there dressed very soberly, almost as if they were men in skirts. You know, they didn't want to wear anything glamorous because they didn't want to stand out. And I tried very hard not to do that. I just wanted to get on with my job. I wore what I thought was suitable. I had a very weird haircut once at one time, Kim, that you'll remember, that was probably most unbarrister-like, but it was my haircut. And I just got on with being me to impress people with my abilities. And I think, you know, at a micro level, that's all you can really do. So if I could just explore that, I'm a mediator now. Do I have to choose between success and likability? I don't think so. The first job of a mediator is to build rapport and trust. I'm going to be spending a lot of time with people in difficult situations. They don't want to hear what a great success I am. They don't want to hear my success rate. They want to like me. They may be with me for 12 hours in the day. I'm going to take them on a really difficult journey where they face some difficult home truths and are going to have to compromise on what they wanted. And actually, unless they like me and then are able to trust me, I think it's very, very difficult to be successful as a mediator. So I think they're essential prerequisites and they go hand in hand. I also think as a barrister, which I did for a long time, it's not an either or choice. When you cross-examine somebody, you don't have to be cross, you don't have to be aggressive, you don't have to be macho. I think advocacy and cross-examination is all about your personality and your likability. If you cross-examine somebody, you get much more out of them by forming a bond with them. They like you and outslip all the details about where the bodies are buried. It's a very effective way of treating people. And advocacy is about presenting your arguments to a tribunal in a way that they will want to listen to, want to give you a fair hearing, and want, if they can, to decide in your favour. And what's that if that's not likability? And it engenders trust, I think. So I would say in my areas, they certainly can go together and they should go together.
Yes. I mean, we operate within a framework where we are all allocated roles, and perhaps we can establish our credentials within those roles and not have to prove how we got there. But I think, as Mandy was saying earlier, the challenge is getting there in the first place. And if you're viewed with suspicion for being an ambitious or driven woman, then that can't be helpful. Sue, is this something that you've had experience of?
I'm just thinking, I agree with a lot that Rosemary's saying about the need to just actually be confident in yourself and what results will result. And the way I took the question when you asked it is that likability, I don't have likability as a thing at one end of a spectrum and success as the other end of the spectrum. The two ends of the spectrum are, if you look at it like that, a likability and this kind of sort of bravado, look at me approach at the other end. And they're both kind of acts. If you're acting both of them, neither of that is going to be successful. You've got to find the middle ground and just be confident in yourself and be yourself, because neither of them are going to be convincing. Both of them can be shields for bullying behavior in different ways. I just don't have that spectrum of success and likability. I don't see it like that.
I think you may have heard of the Howard and Heidi study, where the same CV was given to a group of Harvard students, and they were asked to, business school students, they were asked to judge whether the person on the CV would make a good colleague. It was an identical CV, and half of the students had the name Heidi at the top and the other had Howard. And everyone thought that both candidates were brilliant. But whilst they thought that Howard was a really good bloke, they thought that Heidi would be a quite difficult, prickly, challenging colleague. And And this sort of highlighted the fact that men are expected to work individually. And if they cooperate with each other, they build up credit between themselves, and you hear them say, thank you for that, I owe you one. Whereas with women, they're expected to work collaboratively. And if they don't, you know, can you get this order out? My secretary's gone home and I'd like to go today. If you say, no, I'm sorry, I've got a life appointment or whatever, then not only do you not get I owe you one, but you get well, she's difficult to work with black mark against your name. But I think half of the battle is recognizing that there is this dichotomy. And then that explains some of the reactions that you get perhaps when you're least expecting them. Can I move on then to think about the extent to which women actually promote their own interests and put themselves forward for jobs? Again, another statistical challenge shows that women will only put themselves forward if they meet at least 100% of the criteria, whereas men go for it if they believe they satisfy 60%. And I thought there was a tremendous example of that when George Osborne, if you remember him, he was Chancellor of the Exchequer under the David Cameron government, when he found himself unexpectedly out of a job post-Brexit, without any newspaper experience at all. He assumed the editorial job for the Evening Standard. And I thought this is a classic example of promoting yourself in the face of your own inabilities. So Sue, is that something that you've come across?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's there and obviously it's a problem. And for whatever reason, I mean, we know this because that's why in the UK we've had to have legislative intervention to deal with gender pay gaps and things like that. That's what this is all about. And we've all cheered, haven't we, as we've seen those women at the BBC who've put their head above the parapet and challenged all those long-standing historic disparities. In terms of solution, I think there's a huge amount to do, but there has to be everybody, men and women, we have to start finding a more open and more frank dialogue about these things and be able to discuss them. In the spirit of openness, one thing that interests me, and I'd be interested to see if there's any response to this in the chat, is I've found as adjudicator, particularly when I discuss payment with all my male colleagues, I get the distinct impression that I find it harder and have more difficulty getting paid than they do. And I suspect it is easier not to pay me sometimes than it is not to pay a bloke. Because when I get to the stage, as I've done several times, of letters before claim and things like that to try and get my adjudication fees out of people, I talk to the chaps about it and they say, oh, well, I've done it once or I've done it twice. And I think, hang on, do you know, this isn't my experience. So there we are, in the spirit of openness. I think we need to have open, frank discussions about it. And that's what I offer up. And I'd be interested to know if anybody's done any work around that, actually. Because we see work around the front end stuff, sort of allocation of work, gender pay gap studies and so on, but actually getting paid.
Yeah,
I'd be interested to know if that's an issue, actually.
Well, there's a challenge for Queen Mary College or King's College London or Adjudication Society, who has trouble getting paid. I wonder if we can move on to perhaps a bigger, wider canvas to the myth of having it all. Once your career gets established, also your lives progress, relationships become established, families are had. Is it possible to have it all, or is that a bit of a trap? Dorothy, what's your perspective on that?
Yes, thank you, Kim. My perspective on having it all, whether it's a trap or not, I believe, depends on the individual woman. Having it all in terms of having a career, having a marriage, having children, you just have to be able to juggle everything, all of these roles. Taking myself as an example, I personally would not think is a trap. You just have to be prepared for the role. Women do not become successful overnight. As you begin to progress in your career, you begin to see what challenges there would be on the way. And if you decide to go ahead, then you must bear in mind that you must be able to do the juggling act. I've been married for 35 years. I have a career and I've got children. My daughter is a lawyer. So I think the challenge in having it all, so to speak, is being able to perform the respective roles at different times. For instance, I think the last thing I would tell a client is that I couldn't meet a deadline because my child was sick. So I've had an instance acting in my capacity as a mother. I've had to write a brief in the hospital because a case was coming up and there my daughter had an asthmatic attack. I had to take her to the hospital. She was admitted and immediately the drip was applied on. I went home to pick my bags and I stayed in the hospital. I wrote my brief and sent my clerk to file it. So that is part of the challenges. In terms of children, you have to be there for the kids. So what I have done, I do homework with my children when they were young. And while I'm doing my work, they sit around my table and we work together. We also play together. I've been fortunate to have a very supporting spouse who stands in for the children. He does school run and stuff like that. So I believe that once you have the mindset that you want to pursue a career, you want to be in a marriage, in a happy marriage, and you want to have successful children, you must be prepared to make the sacrifice. So a woman that has all of these, career, marriage, and children, the difference with the other women is that you're not going to have as much free time to yourself as many other women do. And I've learned to work at night because I give the family during the day the time that is required when I come back from work. And then in the night when everybody is asleep, I then get onto my work table and work. That has made me extremely nocturnal. So I do not personally think that having it all is a trap. In my own opinion, you just have to be mentally prepared to juggle all the acts. And it's gratifying if you have a family, your kids are successful, and your career is at an advanced stage. So I've done it all, and I think I've enjoyed doing it. I haven't suffered any deprivation. I haven't had any cause to choose between my family and my work or my career and my children. I have a very supportive family, and to that extent, I don't feel that having it all is a trap. It is just extremely challenging. And women who want to play in that league must be prepared to go through the challenge. I have taken my child to the clinic. She was sick, and I had to attend court at 9 o'clock. I left the baby in the car with the air conditioning running, and I had to rush to court, come back from court, and then the sacrifice we made was that we left the air conditioner running for about 3 hours until I finished from court. So I took the child to the clinic, brought the child to court, left her in the car with the nanny, rushed into court, finished my case, went into the car and took the child back home and stayed with the child at home. It's extremely challenging, but it's doable. So I personally don't think it's a trap. When I look back at my family, I'm very happy. When I look at my career, I'm very happy. When I look at my marriage, I'm very happy. So I do not think it's a trap.
It really does sound like you have got it all, Dorothy. Rosemary, is that your experience? Nighttime working, is that the way to get things done?
Listening to Dorothy, you hear a story of a very strong and determined woman, and echoes of things I'm sure we've all done. You know, I've been up all night with my twin babies when they were little, being sick all over me, and then once they fall asleep, I do the set of papers that I promised by 9 o'clock in the morning. We do those things. But the other thing I was struck by was the unlikelihood of ever hearing a man tell the same story that Dorothy's just told. It just wouldn't happen. So having it all, I think having it all is something about the definition of it actually is quite important, because I think with a lot of people who are not as strong as Dorothy, what it really means is doing it all and having a nervous breakdown whilst trying to do it all properly. I don't think that's a tenable place for women to be. And I recognise that I'm in a very privileged position. I've always been able to earn enough money to pay for a full-time nanny and a cleaner and some gardeners who came, you know, and I was also in a position in my profession where I could dictate terms. I could say, and my children are very small, I'm working 2 days a week, then 3 days a week. Like I say, I wouldn't go out of London to do a trial. I wouldn't do anything longer than 2 weeks. If I did do a trial, I'd want the equivalent amount of time off afterwards to reconnect with the children. Great. It was still completely exhausting. It was so hard, even with all that backup. So, you know, I'm not really in a position to see how it is for other people, but I know that even with lots of privileges, it's difficult. And I think I probably made things worse by what I think of as a superwoman complex. Maybe I was making up to my children for the fact that I wasn't at home as a full-time mum, that I was out at work sometimes if they came home from school. I had to be the best mother there was, and the best barrister there was, and the best homemaker there was. It was ridiculous. You know, I could have got birthday cakes from a very good cake shop down the road, which is famous for making cakes. No, I'd be up until 3 o'clock in the morning making a handmade bespoke cake for my children's birthdays. Anybody can sort the laundry, but only I could make sure I'd sorted it so that my tights didn't go in the tumble dryer and come out tumbled to a crisp and disintegrate while I put them on. I felt that I had to carry everything. I was in charge of the household, the family, the children, the job. And I loved it. I took huge pride in being the best barrister and the best mother I could. And if anything gave, it was going to be me. But I don't think that's an acceptable place to be. It takes a very heavy toll. So I think the aim should be not having it all, but having as much as you want on terms that work for you. And I think that involves the sharing of parental and domestic burdens. A couple both sleep in those sheets that need washing. You made the baby together and it needs its nappy changing. You both need to be in control of when vaccinations are happening and who's going to parents' evening. That's really important. And I think you need to put frameworks in place. How many days will I work? I'm really pleased to see how often I get out of office messages from women now saying, I don't work on Fridays, so I won't reply until Monday. Or I've sent this message to you at a time convenient to me. It may not be convenient to you. Please reply when it is convenient to you. And then I'll respond at a convenient time for me. This is women taking control of their work and doing it in a way that will work with their family. So I think you have to do that. You have to have personal rules. You know, are you always going to make sure you're there for bedtime to read the story and then maybe get back to work afterwards? What are your personal rules? And then keep them under review as life changes. But I think a lot of work needs to be done, because certainly the profession that I've spent most of my life in is very demanding, and you can't just expect it to work itself out.
So I think that's an important distinction you've made there between having it all, that's the career, marriage, children, and a life of your own, and doing it all, because doing it all requires that finite element, which is time. There are only 24 hours in the day, and you may be superwoman, but you can't do anything about that. Perfectionism is the enemy of progress, as we know, and ultimately we may be our own worst enemies. for listening to that voice inside our head that makes us feel guilty if we don't stay up until 3 in the morning making 2 birthday cakes for the same day, in your case, Rosemary. And bearing in mind that the voice inside our head, it isn't actually the voice of God. It just sounds like it thinks it is. And that we should just speak back and say, I am not working on Friday. I read a quote which said, show me a woman without guilt and I'll show you a man. And this suggestion, Rosemary, again, that you've encapsulated, that we shouldn't be trying to do it all or have it all or be it all or match up to God's judgment here, but do the best we can with what we've got and enjoy it. Because if we can't enjoy it, what is it all about? What, you know, it's a journey, it's a challenge, but we need to be get some sort of benefit out at the end. Dorothy, I was interested to hear that your husband does the school run. Is that the full extent of his domestic commitment here, or is he a partner domestically as well?
No, that's not the full length of its domestic work. My husband is a successful advertising practitioner, but he's very, very encouraging. And what I would say is, well, at the time I got married, everything I've done, I have done as a married woman, because I read political science as my first degree, and I went back to school to read law. I got married before I graduated from the university to read law. So everything I've achieved, whatever it's worth, I've achieved as a married woman. My LLB as a married woman, my LLM as a married woman, my chartered arbitrator, everything I've done as a married woman. And the question here is there a glass ceiling at home? I couldn't have been able to do all of this if I didn't have a spouse that was interested in my success. So when I'm unable to, again, living in Africa, Nigeria, we, like Rosemary, we have all sorts of assistants. We have nannies, we have drivers, you have a chef, you have a steward. And, you know, those are the kind of help that you get. And my husband once told me that doing the school run enables him he finds it a bonding time with the children. So when I'm unable to pick the children from school, and when they were young, and I have a meeting, for instance, I'll call up my husband to tell him that, please, can you pick up the kids? And he'll readily do that. And it's been like that. So what I would say about the glass ceiling, is there a glass ceiling at home? It actually depends on your spouse, your decision, the kind of man you've been married to. So I would advise those who have not married yet to be very, very cautious about the sort of men they marry. If you are unfortunate to marry a man that stops you and gives you a glass ceiling at home, you're not going to make any progress. And you cannot make progress in an environment that is not peaceful and loving. That's my experience. So this issue of men helping women or advancing the career of women, you must have a man that is confident of himself, a man that allows you to fly, a man that does not see you as a threat, and who sees your success as his own success. That is the only way I think a married woman can make progress. Because some men are jealous of their wives, some men outrightly stop their wives from progressing. If you have such a man, then you have a glass ceiling at home.
Yeah. There's a saying that caught my eye when I was a trainee lawyer, which said, behind every successful woman, there's a man who's slightly surprised. And I think I think we could probably live with that. But if it gets to the extent that you've said that, and that surprise becomes antagonistic, then you are, if not doomed, then seriously challenged. I want to keep in the domestic forum, if I may, and but bring us right up to date with the challenges of the pandemic, where we've all been stuck at home with our lives. In whatever format they present. And there's been a lot of studies to suggest that this has increased the burden on women. But just if we could just focus on Zoom, here we all are gathered together on Zoom now. Has it been a help? Is it a help to advancing women's career, or is it a hindrance? Sue, have you got a view on that?
It was interesting to hear Lucy earlier talking about how in her perception and a number of people's perceptions, it's become a bit of a male-dominated space. But I think it is possible to find some positives in there, actually. One of the two things have struck me. One is that when I've done hearings on it, but particularly ones involving witnesses and quite a lot of contention, it involves cooperation, actually, and you hit this other level of cooperation where everybody, however difficult they're about to be with each other, they all have to cooperate at the level of we have to wait for people because they can't join, and then we have to deal with the people who can't switch their microphone on like me. And I think it has engendered a degree of cooperation to an extent, and collaborative working, which is to be welcomed. The other thing that I've heard mentioned to me by someone who's been teaching construction professionals at a professional conduct stage, they expressed the view that when they have a large group, so like 100 plus of students, particularly using the chat function with people raising questions, they hear more from the quieter people because it is easier to ask a question that way than stick your hand up in a lecture hall of 100 people. And the person I was speaking to who was doing this said, actually, it's meant the level of debate has got better because you can pick up a question in the chat. You can say, look, you X, you've asked this question, come on, tell us what you're talking about. And so I think there are positives, but more to do with kind of management and behavior than anything else.
Mm-hmm. So it's been something of a leveler in some way.
Used in a certain way, yeah, I think.
Now, what about you, Rosemary? Because I remember when the pandemic struck, you were about to head off to Australia, I think, for a 2-week multi-party, multinational humdinger of a mediation, and that wasn't able to happen. Was that the end of your career?
I thought it was going to be, but I really couldn't see how mediation could be done on a screen because we all know it's a very personal thing. It's about people skills. So I was ready to give up. But as it happens, I spent the last 10 months mediating, mostly on Zoom, occasionally on Teams and WebEx, and I love it. I can only talk about the effect on mediations because that's the only way I use it. For me personally, it's really convenient. I'd like to Zoom forever. Everybody's there, I can see their faces, and it works very well. And I think we bond over some of the technical glitches that Sue was talking about. By the time we've got everybody there, we're quite good friends. But you don't have to travel. And you're right, Kim, I was going to go to Perth to do a mediation. And instead of people flying from all over the world to Australia, we waited a couple of months to see what's going to happen, but we were able to set up a mediation where we had people in 8 different time zones, going from Canada right through to Japan and Australia. And we couldn't mediate, traditional days, but we found times when everybody would be up, either at the beginning, the middle, or the end of their day. And we found that we could have an hour at lunchtime when just about everybody was awake. And then we'd mediate from 10 o'clock at night till about midnight. And we did that 4 or 5 days in a row. And it sounds a bit weird, but it's not nearly as weird as getting in a plane, spending 24 hours flying across the world, and then 2 days recovering from the jet lag, causing pollution, great expense, and then doing the same thing coming back again. Doing a bit of mediating at midnight on Zoom was actually, it was brilliant. So I think international work will be much aided by this, because we don't need to fly around the world to do everything. We can do an awful lot of it on Zoom. So for me, it's brilliant. But of course, it has brought work into the home. And I know there's lots of negative reaction to that. All I can say is what I've seen is women who come to my mediations, they're not mediating every day. They maybe come to a mediation 2 or 3 times a year. They can do it at home. It can work around the family. I've had men and women on my mediations, which I'm afraid often tend to go into the evening. I've had them saying, I've just got to bath the children, or I've just got to go and stop that fight. I've just got to pop out and pick up my child from school because the lift didn't work. All sorts of things like that. We have children who crawl past on all fours thinking they won't be noticed as they go to the fridge while their parents at the kitchen table. Life just goes on around it. And mediation certainly can be very, very flexible. And I can say, look, if you've got to go and pick up your child from school, or if you've got to feed them their lunch or their tea, that's fine. I can be talking to the other team while you're doing that. And then we can come back. And yes, we will go into the evening, but it'll be done on terms that are acceptable. What I've seen, I think, has been very good. So I say it may go on late sometimes, but it did that in the old days as well. And if a mediation goes quite late, at least when you've got your deal and electronically signed the settlement agreement, you're at home and all you've got to do is turn off the screen and put your pajamas on. You haven't got to get a bus and a train and then walk the last bit of the way home, which is awful at the end of a process like that. So I think it's got an awful lot of positives.
Well, that is very interesting. Now, look, ladies, I could continue this discussion forever, but I'm afraid we're not allowed to. So I want to wrap up with a little conclusion comment. And looking back to the younger selves that you introduced at the beginning, or any younger woman out there wanting to know, poor thing, poor woman, if she wants to end up like us, what is your top tip for yourself? What would be your top tip for getting where you are today? Can I start with Sue on that one, please?
Not a top tip really for getting where I am, but particularly having listened to Rosemary and Dorothy and revisited all those years of babies. And in a way, I look at my teenage daughters every day and sort of think, oh God, what do I say to you? And do you know, I wouldn't rush now to actually appear to be super capable and the person who can do everything. There's an awful lot to be said for not being the person who does everything. So it's actually, I don't do that. I don't do the dishwasher. I don't do, there are things I don't do. Not driving would have made a huge difference to my life, really, really. So top tip is, it sounds very counterintuitive, but I just feel I need to say to them, just don't always be terribly, terribly capable and pull everything onto yourself.
Dorothy, what about you?
Thank you, Kim. What I would say to my younger self and to younger women wishing to rise up in their careers would be to choose a career, make determined efforts to turn your dream a dream, make determined efforts to translate your dreams into reality. Remain focused, bearing in mind that there will be challenges, and be determined to stay focused and be determined to overcome those challenges. You're not supposed to see challenges and then give up. You mustn't give up. There are several challenges on the way. So I'll tell my younger self, remain focused, stay in there, and ensure that you get to your dream, to your desired position, and turn your dreams into reality. It's not going to be easy, but if other women have accomplished it, you too can do it. It's extremely challenging, but it's doable. And I believe that nothing is impossible.
So the theme for Women's Day today is choose to challenge. So rising to the challenges is the gauntlet thrown down for us. Rosemary, what's your top tip?
I suppose my tip is for people like me who didn't have a career goal, as Dorothy did. You know, I didn't grow up wanting to be anything in particular. I don't think I really had any ambition. I would say, assume you're capable of doing anything. Don't limit your expectations. Don't say, because I'm a woman, I couldn't do that. You know, I could have said, or my parents could have said, well, how could you ever be a barrister? And there would have been a lot of logic for them saying that. But just to say, if that's what I want to do, I'll try it. I'll do my very best. Take opportunities. Something comes your way and you like the sound of it, do the very best you can, because your career, life, and happiness may lie in unexpected directions. And I certainly never thought I was going to be a construction specialist.
Well, I was so taken by Rosemarie's desire to be an undertaker that I forgot to share with you that my family was roundly alarmed when I announced to them at about the age of 10 that I wanted to be a magistrate. And the real cause for concern was that apparently this was an unpaid job and it didn't amount to a career at all. But we finally cleared things up and got back on track. That actually what I was talking about was being a barrister. And the thing that I say to people, particularly I've seen in the chat and in the Q&A that there are a lot of challenges to young people coming into our careers and our professions, which of course we can't really talk about because it was very different for us back then. And without wanting to sound geriatric, but it's true. I mean, there were no mobile phones when I was growing up. That's how different it was. But I encourage people to think of a role as an ADR professional, as an arbitrator or neutral, as a long-term objective. You don't come out of university with a degree in adjudication and immediately get your first appointment. It's much more like saving up for your pension so that one day you'll be able to have a nice holiday or two. And what I do say though is don't give up. Don't ever give up. You stick to it. Just stick at it. And I say, be like the stamp on the letter. Stick to it until you get there. And then you can be like us. Look at us. Now, look, on one view, our timing has been absolutely brilliant because this is Catherine's slot now. On the other hand, I've been horribly negligent and haven't allowed enough time for the Q&A. But all of the panelists are available. You have their details. Some of you have some very interesting questions, and I think you would benefit with connecting with the panelists and sharing your experiences. Before I hand over to Catherine, I've been reminded that in my capacity as London branch rep, to remind everyone that the next event is on the 24th of March when there's a lunchtime workshop about hybrid hearings. And we now know what they are. And on the 21st of April, there's the AGM and Professor Maxi Shearer will be giving the keynote address. So as long as I get a brownie point for timekeeping, I'm now very happy to hand over to Catherine Dixon. Thank you all.
International Women's Day is a global day celebrating the social, economic, and cultural and political achievements of women. The day also marks a call to action for accelerating gender parity. The day has occurred for over a century, with the first International Women's Day gathering in 1911, supported by over 1 million people in Austria, Denmark, Germany, and Switzerland. Even before this, the Socialist Party of America and the United Kingdom suffragists and suffragettes campaigned for women's equality. Today, much of the world expects equality, diversity, and inclusion. Yet, as Lucy recognised, we know that the pandemic has intensified the challenges women face in the workplace. At CIArb, we know that the crucial role women play in all aspects of effective dispute resolution. Our ongoing Women in ADR campaign, mentioned by Anne, highlights women's significant contribution across all areas of practice. Please take time to read the campaign interview, which are on our website, and learn more about the views, experiences, and opinions of inspirational women at different stages of their career. We know that more work needs to be done to achieve gender parity. We should not underestimate the challenges we still face. As Anne highlighted, the ICCA report on gender diversity in arbitral appointments and proceedings released in 2020 showed that the proportion of female arbitrators in commercial arbitration stood at 21% in 2019. This, in fact, marks an impressive progress from the base of 12% in 2015, but it's still far from the equality we should be striving for. The lack of female representation is not only a problem in arbitration. A recent CEDAW Foundation report showed that in the UK, only 33% of commercial mediators are women, and the average commercial mediation panel has 28% of women. There is a similar picture in construction adjudication. As recently as 3 years ago, figures from the Adjudication Society showed that for adjudicator nominating bodies, female representation was as low as 4%, and even the best performing institution was only as high as 20%. We're also conscious of the gender imbalance within CIArb's membership and are committed to taking practical steps to address this. That's why we've partnered with the Equal Representation in Arbitration Young Practitioners subgroup to provide discounted training for ERA members, and why we're launching a mentoring scheme later this year specifically intended for members who are underrepresented within our membership. I'll leave you with a few thoughts and thank yous. From challenge comes opportunity and change. The rise of women is not about the fall of men. Everyone has a role to play in forging gender parity. Gender parity is not solely a women's issue. It's an issue for all of us, including an economic issue. I know that if we work collectively together, we will, as Mandy has so ably and eloquently recognised, continue to make positive progress achieving gender parity by recognising the credible contribution and talent that women bring to every aspect of our lives. And finally, for Mandy, in the words of Spock, and continuing on the Star Trek theme, live long and prosper. I take this opportunity to thank Anne Ryan Robertson, CIArb's president, for her opening comments, Lucy Greenwood for her introductory remarks, our panel, Rosemary, Susan, Dorothy, and Kim. What a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much. And of course, a massive thank you to Amanda Lee for her brilliant and inspiring speech. Thank you all for attending this inspiring event from wherever you are in the world. I look forward to seeing you all at our Roebuck lecture on the 10th of June, which will be delivered by the Honourable Lady Justice Jose Al York. Happy International Women's Day, and thank you.